Well, thanks so much for staying with Morning Live. The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, says that every effort will be made to engage with the current conflicting parties in Sudan to persuade them to lay down arms and work for peace. Also, that the people of Sudan should not be forgotten as they face a terrible time. Now, this comes as the fighting between the Sudanese army and paramilitary rapid support forces continues to claim lives, with foreign governments evacuating their diplomats and nationals. So to give us an update on the security and risk situation that was involved in getting South Africans evacuated from Sudan, we're joined by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation spokesperson, Clayson Monyela. Clayson, good to have you with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on the platform.
So firstly, there have been some mixed reaction, as you would have heard, with regard to how the South African government first dealt with the evacuation process of nationals in Sudan. So let's just talk about that, with regard to when you first became aware of the crisis and what the government then set out to do.
Yeah, no thanks. I mean, I saw you had a gentleman there yesterday who has been evacuated as part of the group that we brought home, who doesn't appear impressed with what government has done, which I thought was very disappointing. If you consider the fact that bigger countries, which are more richer and therefore have more resources, only evacuated embassy staff out of Sudan because of the prevailing security situation and how dangerous and difficult it is to evacuate larger groups. South Africa opted to do this differently. We kept our embassy staff in Sudan with our South African nationals who were still stranded there until we could mount an operation that would get everybody out. This gentleman that you had there was part of that group. We got him to Egypt, booked him into a hotel. The South African National Defense Force, Special Forces were on the ground to make sure that everybody is moved to Nairobi, where we got them into a commercial flight, paid for by the South African government, and we brought everybody home. He comes onto your platform, he says, this could have been done better or differently. When Western countries have not even moved their citizens out, it's the most unbelievably ungrateful thing I've ever seen a national doing.
And would you, though, consider, Clayson, that perhaps given the situation and what people were experiencing on the ground, perhaps they were just feeling a bit, under threat, under siege, and could you perhaps ascribe it to that, the fact that they were just scared out of their wits of what was going on around them?
Yeah, if he was talking like this, still in Sudan, stranded, stressed, and of course traumatized, one could excuse and understand that. The gentleman is in South Africa. He's safe. He's been brought here by government at the cost of government, and he's talking like that. This South African government has demonstrated from time to time that when our nationals are in harm's way, we move with speed and we bring them home. If you think about COVID-19, we move people out of China. If you think about Ukraine, we move people out of Ukraine when the situation was dangerous and people were dying. We've done it again with Sudan. Our people are grateful that they are home. They've been reunited with their families. We didn't leave anything to chance. Other countries are still begging. In fact, we brought even nationals of neighboring countries in SADC, Angolans, people from Zimbabwe, Lesotho. This is what South Africa does. And for an individual to try and rubbish that is completely unacceptable.
So if I remember correctly, I think he was also talking about the situation with the buses. So what happened with those buses? Because if I understood him correctly, he was talking about a situation whereby buses were organized and for some or other reason that didn't quite materialize, and therefore other buses had to be contracted. So what initially happened there, and what were the lessons that you learned from that situation?
Yeah, Like you're talking about a normal situation where people are organizing buses to go on holiday, to go to Durban, to go and have a good time. You would have many bus companies available to give you buses. In Sudan, it's a war situation. Every country is trying to get people out. Every bus company is busy. There is a lack of availability. So it is understandable that there will be an arrangement that falls off. The important thing is finally buses were secured under trying circumstances. 2 buses were paid for by the South African government. The next day, there was a need for an extra bus, which was paid for by the gift of the givers. And we, by the way, acknowledge and appreciate their partnership with government to pull off this operation. We got the support of Sudan itself, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, because some of our people crossed from Port Sudan into Jeddah, where they were received by a team from the consulate. So this was not an easy operation. People had to go through several checkpoints because we got them out through buses, which was risky and dangerous. You saw the French convoy came under fire. So everybody must understand, in a war situation, an evacuation of this nature is never going to be easy. It will face multiple problems and challenges, but we prevailed. We brought our people home safely.
So, Clayson, there are currently reports of more South Africans who are still stranded in Egypt. So, as far as DIRCO is aware, how many people, how many South African nationals are still stuck in Sudan, and how are you assisting them at this point?
So we can confirm that there was a group of 22 South African nationals that were working for a private company in an area near Port Sudan, we understand. The employer had decided to make their own travel arrangements for their employees. I guess they didn't think that it was necessary to inform or work with government. They got to Port Sefaga in Egypt and were refused permission to disembark from their boats. That's when we were contacted as government to say, can you assist? There are South Africans who are stranded at Port Sefaga. They cannot get off their boat. We then activated our embassy in Cairo, Egypt, to immediately speak to the foreign ministry in Egypt to request that permission be granted. We are happy to report this morning that permission has now been granted for them to disembark so that they can proceed with their journey. We have sent an official who's going to sign them off this morning. They will then proceed to Cairo, where they will catch a flight with Ethiopian Airlines, fly via Addis Ababa, and should be arriving home in the next coming days.
So are there still, beyond this group, any other South African nationals that you are aware of who are still trying to get out of Sudan or make their way home from whichever port they may find themselves at?
From the information that we have, everybody that was on our database is now out of Sudan. And I think if there was still an individual somewhere stranded, their families would have brought that to our attention. So we're happy to say everybody that we are aware of, that we know of, is safely out of Sudan.
Were there any South Africans who chose to stay in Sudan, Clayson?
Not that we are aware of. Not that we are aware of.
So looking at everything that has happened and some of the criticism that has been leveled at you, whether fairly or unfairly, what would you say were some of the key lessons learned from this particular situation in the event that something like this were to occur again?
You know, the fighting in Sudan was unique in that it involved airstrikes. The airport was damaged, and therefore it was very difficult to do a normal evacuation that countries, would send an aircraft to land on the ground and quickly get people out. So this one was particularly difficult in that sense, and this is why one of the calls that South Africa and the international community have been making is for a temporary or even permanent ceasefire to allow for a safe passage for humanitarian aid, to attend to people who are injured. And of course, the bigger message is for negotiations, for peace, to be given a chance for the two warring factions to allow for mediation so that we can resolve, what led to this current crisis. So it was particularly unique in that sense. But one of the lessons is that evacuations always require collaborations and partnerships between government, NGOs, and neighboring neighboring countries, and that's one of the takeaways from this. So we appreciate the support that we got, which made this operation successful in the end.
Clayson, speaking of, the peace process, and Minister Naledi Pandor had expressed that South Africa would like to play a role in that. Has there been any communication between Khartoum and Pretoria around that situation?
Yeah, so as you heard Minister Pandor saying, South Africa stands ready to play its role. The AU has this goal of silencing the guns on our continent, and it is our wish and hope that we'll reach that state where we're no longer talking about conflict of this nature on our continent. The regional body IGAD has mandated 3 heads of state to play a mediating role in what's currently going on in Sudan, and South Africa is supportive of that process as part of the African continent.
And then the minister also said that she would encourage South Africans who were evacuated from Sudan to seek counseling services for those who came back. Is that something that the department is facilitating, Clayson?
Yeah, no, the South African government stands ready. We do have a department of government that offers that service. So we have made this offer to the South African nationals that have been evacuated, but those who require to be debriefed, because what they went through was certainly traumatic. So you do require professional experts to attend to that. So that offer has been made.
And then just finally, Clayson, with regard to what we've just seen, and unfortunately, we never know whether this is going to repeat itself elsewhere in the world, what would you say South Africans should do when they find themselves in another country? Is there an official process for South African experts to follow when settling for work, study, or for whatever reason in another country?
This is a very good question because it allows us to share information with South Africans. So we always advise South African travelers to firstly inform the department, if you can, of your final destination. If you don't do that, when you get there, find out if there is a South African embassy in that country. Let them know of your presence, just in case there's a situation of distress that arises where you require assistance from the embassy. We've now developed an app, by the way, which you can find on any app store, DIRCO Travel Smart app, that allows you to register. We capture the information. When there's a natural disaster in any part of the world, we're able to have an idea of the number of our nationals in that country so that we can really locate them and provide them with assistance. Another thing that's helpful for travelers is to get travel insurance. We've had situations where South Africans unfortunately pass away when they're in foreign countries, and families have an obligation of bringing the mortal remains for a burial here at home, and some don't always have the resources to do that. So travel insurance helps in those cases. So that would be our advice. Inform us, get travel insurance, and those who are, techno-savvy, download the app and share information with us.
Well, certainly, because I must admit, I'm perhaps guilty of that, because even when I travel abroad, I never think of really announcing my presence in any country to the South African embassy in that country. So if you just share that app, the app details with us again, Clayson, maybe just to take a look at that.
Yeah, so this would be available on any app store. It's called DIRCO Travel Smart app.
DIRCO Travel Smart. Okay, and I think that's perhaps the lesson to be learned from all of this, among others. And thank you so much for speaking to us this morning, Clayson Monyela. And Clayson is, of course, the DIRCO spokesperson, just giving us an update on what's happening with the repatriation of South Africans from war-torn Sudan, and also just some advice in terms of what one should do so that the South African government is aware of your presence in any country in the world should anything happen, and the government would then be able to assist more effectively in that instance.